Hello and welcome to Good Game, the show for gamers, by gamers. I'm Bajo.
And I'm Junglist.
This week we've been trawling through the interwebs to find the best free games there are on offer, and believe it or not, there's a lot of excellent games out there that will have you playing for hours and leave your wallet intact.
We'll be talking to Peter Molyneux. He's the developer behind such games as Fable and Black and White. And Lux takes a look at violence in video games. What effect, if any, do they have on our real lives?
All that plus the latest expansion to Command & Conquer, Kane's Wrath. But first, can you guess the game for this week?
I was so afraid you decided not to come.
Oh, no way. I've been looking forward to this all week.
Sarah, this is beautiful, by the way.
We'll give you a clue. It's one of the first games that caused controversy because of its subject matter. Whose turn to read the news this week, John?
Mine!
I totally won that.
No.
It has been revealed this week that Grand Theft Auto 4 will be edited for its Australian release. The controversial game series has had a long history with Australia's Office of Film and Literature Classification. Grand Theft Auto 3, Vice City and San Andreas were all censored for Australian audiences, and the fourth in the series is no different, with developer Rockstar Games submitting a censored version of the game to the ratings board. It has not yet been announced what content has been removed from the game, only that changes were necessary to ensure that the game received an MA15+ rating. We spoke to a Rockstar Games representative, but at the time of recording, they were unable to divulge any more details. Toronto, Canada-based game developer Pseudo Interactive have reportedly closed their doors for the last time this week. Pseudo Interactive were best known as the creators of the Full Auto franchise, a polished series of car combat games that can best be described as Burnout with guns. The main cause for the closure is thought to be the cancellation of an unnamed project that the developer was working on for game publisher Eidos Interactive, although at the time of reporting, Pseudo Interactive had made no official announcement. Electronic Arts have announced that it will be reducing the number of sports titles it brings to the PC in the future, with the head of EA Sports division, Peter Moore, calling the platform a serious business challenge. On his blog, Moore revealed that EA will be cutting PC sports games because the majority of players are buying sports games for the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and Wii. Peter Moore also added that EA does have ideas on how to revitalise the PC as a platform for sports games, but that for now, they will stick to games that are best suited to the PC platform. The first game to be left off the PC release schedule will be John Madden Football 2009, and the future of other EA Sports releases on the PC, including NBA Live and FIFA, are, for the time being, uncertain.
Good game.
Sneakiness, deception, dissension in the ranks, ridiculously good-looking two ICs, and a man who wants to have the shiniest head in the room is what fans of Command & Conquer can expect in the latest expansion, Kane's Wrath.
The story is completely based around the Brotherhood of Nod and the three main points in their history, starting with the Second Tiberium War. Cheesy cutscenes fill in the gaps between battles, and Badge, it almost seems as if they're proud of said cheesy.
It is time to sleep. To sleep. Perchance to dream.
Yeah, Jung, it's almost awkward on purpose. Over 13 missions, you'll be required to carry out Kane's orders. Missions are fairly fun, and there's some good stealth and escort-based scenarios, but generally it's a pretty standard expansion with some new units thrown in to mix things up. There's some missions in Australia, though.
That's right, and they showed this by having beaches, and this shows that they did their research, Badge, because Australia has beaches.
That's true. Unfortunately, nothing else in these maps looks anything like Australia.
Most missions will send units at you every 5 minutes, insane amounts of units, until you can build enough of a force for the final assault. Some missions will require you to go commando, destroying power plants and strategic structures. And you'll get the occasional acquire new technology quest, but most are your basic build a base and steamroll over. Also, lots of missions can be won with an infantry spam, or just waiting it out until you can overpower.
The difficulty in the single-player campaign is a bit inconsistent, but that's not to say that there isn't fun to be had here, especially when you get to play with the epic units. They're big, they're mean, and they can hold their own. But there's no dynamic battle scenarios that you see in Company of Heroes, for example. The enemy is still fairly unaware that I'm shooting their base, and this occurred in Tiberium Wars, and it's such a big flaw, I'm surprised it hasn't been fixed.
Yeah, Badge, I mean, it is a pretty important part of RTS game design. If you're not a big fan of the Nod faction, you'll really only be looking at this expansion for its online editions.
There's also a whole new turn-based game mode called Global Conquest. This is where you do a series of skirmishes and you pick a side to take out the other team or satisfy your alternate victory scenario.
You get the option to play out the battles in real time, or you can have them auto-resolve. It's fairly in-depth, but it's single-player only, and unless you're into that kind of gameplay, you'll probably only play it once.
Even though I'm a fairly easy beat, especially for Scrin for some reason, online is where the fun is at, and now there's 6 sub-factions and 12 new multiplayer maps to get your hands on. Some of the classic units have had things like their range altered to try and avoid the tank spam that was prevalent in Tiberium Wars, but it still kind of turns into a bit of a tank rush. Jung, you actually stumbled across a mod which was a bit more balanced for Command & Conquer, didn't you?
Yeah, it's called CNC Lab, and it's made by the people over at Game Replays together with EA as a way of bringing in balance changes months ahead of a patch, so it's worth checking out. But 2 experienced players in Kane's Wrath can have a bit more of an interesting fight online. If you're new to online, you will want to find someone a little close to your skill level, otherwise you'll get disheartened fast. Final thoughts?
As far as the story's concerned, I would have liked a little bit more resolve in each act. The story is a little bit jarring, and there's still pathfinding issues which we've seen in the previous games, and there's nothing worse than having to sort out a bunch of dancing harvesters in the middle of a glitch party while you're fighting someone else. But I've got a bit of a nostalgic old-schoolness soft spot for Command & Conquer, so I'm giving it 7.5 out of 10 rubber chickens.
Despite its facelift, CNC3 is starting to show its wrinkles. There's a lot of choice in RTS at the moment and a lot more in the pipeline. But even though it has an uninspired single-player campaign, fans of the series will enjoy this expansion, even if it's just for the new toys to play with. You will have to have the original copy of CNC3 to play it though. I'm giving it 7 out of 10 Tiberium-infested chickens.
Good game.
When something terrible happens, people will naturally search for answers. When that involves young people, often the spotlight falls on video games, especially violent video games.
If you've got really extreme violence packaged with a game in which you're playing, honing your responses, developing your skills, and you're getting skills in spatial awareness, weapons training, it would seem that you're changing your attitudes to the business of the game, which is killing. We would be really concerned about what that does to a person and whether that changes a person in the real world.
There are a number of ethical issues around violence in video games. The first of them is whether or not they have a detrimental effect on the user or on some broader group of people, like society. I don't have a strong view about it either way. I mean, there's been violence in the world going back centuries, and that is long before video games came about. And I don't think we live in a world which is essentially more violent since they've been introduced. Plus, we've also had young people and old people throughout history exposed to stories which have been full of violence.
Researchers found that in some players, the part of the brain that triggers aggressive feelings or emotions can be stimulated by violent games. But the evidence that this stimulation actually results in violent behaviour is controversial.
There is a link between seeing violence and responding to violence. You look at, say, America's Army, and they're one of the most efficient killing machines in the world, and they use video games to desensitise people. So we can't say video games have no effect, because they do.
So how do you girls feel about violence in video games?
I don't think violence in games influences behaviour in the real world because it's not real. Like, you're not actually physically holding a gun and shooting someone. You're pressing a button which shoots a character in a game. You're not, you know, doing the action yourself, sort of thing. In general, I find that violence is a great outlet. I get frustrated in the traffic on the way home. I can come home and, right, let's take it out on a fictional character that I know is not going to have any repercussions. I like violence because in video games, just because it's something that you can't do in real life, and it's thrilling being able to live in this digital world and perform acts that you couldn't do in the real world. A lot of computer game research, violence video game research, is based on lobbyists, or it's based on a censorship lobby's need to prove a certain thing. That's not research at all, and that's not helping anybody, certainly not parents.
Opinion usually dominates these debates when there's an absence of clarity around facts. But that research is still, I think, being done and will take some time because it's just, you know, the passage of time since these games were introduced hasn't passed yet sufficiently to be able to say what effect they're going to have.
Why do you think new technology is a scapegoat?
I think at this point it's more useful to ask what is the social hysteria about? Why are politicians still afraid to have a more open dialogue with computer games? Why is it still such an easy decision to make, to castigate them as some kind of this huge social wrong? I mean, throughout history, every time there's a technology or a social technology, there's been people freaking out about its effects. So I think if you don't grow up with a technology, but your child does, it feels like they're in comprehension of the world in a way that you're not. We need to start educating kids about computer games at 6 or 7, not at 15. It needs to begin really early because they're already playing games. The second before they use a computer, there needs to be a conversation about good use of computers and bad use. Instead of worrying about, you know, filtering the internet and filtering computer games.
Those who develop games, whether they intend or not, whether they're conscious of it or not, are always building in some kind of an ethical default for, against or neutral towards certain kinds of conduct because of what they then show as the consequence of it.
Now, there is a lot of lazy computer game making out there at the moment where cheap violence is used to sensationalise.
Sorry about the mess. Billy here thought it'd be a good idea to skim off the top and, well, let's just say he was wrong.
At the same time, governments have to realise that this free kick they've had for 25 years, that computer games are always bad, that free kick has to stop.
Now, we know you're going to have a lot to say about this topic. Does having great aim in a game mean you could accurately fire a gun in real life? Do you think you're desensitised to violence because of your experience with games? We're keen to hear thoughts, so jump on the forums and leave us a post.
Tell you what makes me angry, Badge, is having to fork over large slabs of cash for a game, and I imagine it's the same for everyone. But fear not, gamers, help is at hand.
There are a lot of games, hundreds actually, where you don't have to pay a single cent to play, and some of them are just as good as you'd find in a game shop and pay top dollar for. However, on the flip side, some of them are much, much worse. So how do you decide what to download and what to avoid?
Well, we've taken the guessing out of it by putting together a list of the top 5 gratis games.
First up, Trackmania Nations. For the 2006 Esports World Cup, Trackmania developers Nadio released a special version of their stunt-jumping track-building game for $0 down.
Trackmania Nations gives you almost 100 pre-made tracks with 3 levels of difficulty, as well as online play and the ability to design your own tracks in the game's build mode, meaning the game's longevity is only limited by your own imagination.
And besides all that, the Trackmania series has been one of the most fun PC racing games that's been out there, so getting a full professional version for no dollars down is a big plus.
Next up in our list of fun freebies is this. It's Warsaw, and it's one of the best free first-person shooters around. It takes inspiration from games like Quake 2 and Unreal Tournament, although it differentiates itself by having its specialty as trick jumping.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of complexity here, Jung. You can wall jump, you can bunny hop to gather speed, and rocket jump to reach those high areas. The weapons are also varied and interesting, and the whole cartoon-style cel-shaded graphics is pretty cool.
Any free game that attempts to better Quake 2 at trick jumping and succeeds is going to amass a huge competitive scene very quickly, and that's just what's happened with Warsaw. There's already strong community support for it, and a few esports leagues have already accepted it as a competitive title, a big achievement for a free game.
Next up is a game that we know a lot of Good Game viewers are familiar with. It's the massively multiplayer online role-playing game called RuneScape. Now, it's no secret that RuneScape is ugly. I mean, graphically speaking, it's a dog's breakfast, and not one of those gourmet dog's breakfasts either. But if you take the time to settle into this online fantasy world and look past the primitive visuals, you'll find a deep and immersive game with a strong online community.
After you've created your low-polygon adventurer, you embark on a quest to slay orcs, hoard treasure, and fish for shrimp, along with many other traditional role-playing activities, all without laying down any of your real-life gold pieces.
The servers are always heavily populated, and there's 3 Australian servers, which is more than we could say for most commercial MMOs out there.
The next game in our Fab Freeware 5 is War Rock. Now, if you're into first-person shooters like Counter-Strike or Battlefield 2, you'll get right into this because it's basically a hybrid of those 2 games.
Yeah, there's quite a few similarities, aren't there? First up, you've got close combat, which you have to defuse a bomb while exchanging enemy fire with the enemy. And most importantly, it's fun and very reminiscent of Counter-Strike. The other two, Urban Combat and Battle Group, are very much like Battlefield 2. You choose from 5 classes and then you're dropped into a war zone complete with jeeps, tanks and aircraft.
Graphically, it looks a little dated, but the shooting action was top-notch, so we can't really complain. One thing that did annoy me, though, is that it doesn't have any dedicated servers, and it's kind of hard to find an Australian-hosted match, meaning the pings aren't ideal. Despite that, Warrock is one of the best freebie shooters around, and if it manages to establish a local scene, then those lag issues should be smoothed right out.
And now to the final game on our list, Frets on Fire. Now, Jung, you know I love me some Guitar Hero.
As do I.
And I also like not paying for things, and that's just what you can do with Frets on Fire. It's the next best thing to Guitar Hero, and best of all, it's free.
It certainly looks like Guitar Hero in a low-budget kind of way, and the gameplay is a close match as well. The colored fret button indicators still come at you down a note highway, and although it's nowhere near as polished as Activision's main earner, it's still a lot of fun. And it even gives you the option to add your own songs into the game, something Guitar Hero doesn't do and probably never will.
Now, if you've already got an Xbox 360 hardwired guitar, you can plug that straight into your PC for a more authentic experience. However, if you don't have one, all is not lost, as you can use a keyboard with a little bit of imagination. It was a bit disappointing that you couldn't use the whammy bar, and it would have been nice to have some sort of star power Guitar Hero thing, but then again, the price is right.
So there you have it, gamers. Next time you've got an empty wallet but you still feel like playing something new, don't give up hope. There are plenty of free games out there that are well worth your time.
It's important to note that some of these games are made free by having advertising, especially Trackmania Nations and RuneScape. A quick web search for any of their titles will find their official websites where you can download and play the game.
Now over to you, Gavin Hostman, for a cartridge affair.
Good evening, viewers. Bert Eastman reporting. Unfortunately, Gavin Hostman will be on leave until further notice due to injury, but here at the ACA team, we're all rooting for his speedy recovery. Get well soon, Gavin. But now tonight's story. As summer rolls into the US, so does the Hollywood blockbuster, and both to the delight and the dismay of gamers worldwide, the video game film is more popular than ever. With almost all genres catered for, from fighting, FPS, RPG, and beyond, many believe that there isn't much left for Hollywood to get their hands on. Although Hollywood, it seems, disagrees with this sentiment. In a world exclusive, we at ACA bring you a brand new trailer for an upcoming film, yet another movie hoping to jump from the console to the cinema. We now cross live to New York via telecast with Minesweeper's director, Bo Jarnett. Good evening, Bo.
G'day, Bert.
Tell us, Bo, why did you choose Minesweeper?
Well, you know, it's a modern-day classic, man. Everyone loves it, and I think we can capture that and bring it to the big screen. Really show people the true Minesweeper experience. You know, zazz it up a bit.
Bo, with the medium of cinema lacking interactivity and gaming technology being where it is today, why should people watch your movie instead of just playing the game itself? Bo Jarnett, thank you for your time. After the break, we look at The Sims 3. Will it be just a life simulator, or is it a sinister dictating training program? Stay tuned to find out.
As gamers, we're familiar with those developers who've made their mark by producing incredibly successful games. Will Wright, Hideo Kojima, Shigeru Miyamoto, and Peter Molyneux, for example. In the case of Peter, he's also been recognised outside of games, with an Order of the British Empire in 2004, and 3 years later, the highest French honour awarded to people working in the arts. We caught up with Peter earlier this year at the Games Developers Conference in San Francisco and began by asking him what it's like to have created a whole genre of video games, the God game.
Let's be honest, it feels absolutely fantastic, but you also feel a little bit like a fake. And I'll tell you why, because it's you guys, the journalists, that said, oh, that's a genre. When I sat down and created, Populous, which was the start of this God game genre, I had no idea what I was creating. I certainly wouldn't have called it a genre. I could barely call it a game. And then, to have journalists come in and say, wow, this is, Peter Molyneux created a whole genre, he must be really clever. And you kind of think, crikey, I hope they don't really find me out, because there was no intention behind it. It was just pure luck.
There was a technical reason why you went for certain things in the game. Am I right there?
You're absolutely right. I mean, you have to remember, I'm not a smart person, and I was the programmer on this game called Populous, and I thought, oh, God, I can't get my head around how am I going to get these little people to navigate round and find their way. I know, I'll just get the player to do it. And that's where, in Populous, you raised and lowered the land up. That's where that came from, because I couldn't program it, so I just got the player to solve it for me.
So what is it about God games that attracts us as gamers?
There is a way of saying to yourself, well, I'm going to make this world suffer because I can. And that is very attractive. And actually that very, very simple idea of allowing you, the player, to do what you want to do rather than what me as a designer wants you to do, with what a lot of other games do. They say, you're going to be a hero and you're going to be this sort of hero and you're going to play the game this way, and if you don't play this way, you're going to fail. And I think I've always tried, whether with God games or with games I'm working on now, to say, no, you be who you want to be.
In a career that has spanned more than a quarter of a century, Peter has developed games such as Theme Park, Black and White, Fable, and the movies. He's currently working on Fable's successor, so of course we had to ask him about it.
What is the vision for Fable 2? Firstly, is something called drama. Things like a dog that travels with you, and he is all of our expertise in AI that we can possibly summon up to make it feel like a real dog, and this dog really cares about you and really worries about you, and he's the most charming, wonderful creature you've ever seen in any game. And the reason he's there, because if you start caring about him just a little bit, you'll remember him. And if you remember him, then that is more likely to be drama. The second thing is combat. Our dream in combat is to make combat so unbelievably accessible and simple that anybody, even if they've never played a computer game before, can pick up and play it and enjoy Fable. Gamers would say, oh, you're dumbing down combat, aren't you? It's going to be really boring and rubbish. No. Having combat that is so incredibly deep that you can actually combine your combat styles, combine shooting guns with swinging swords, with magic, in ways that you can define completely your own custom fighting style. And the third thing is co-op. Your world is going to be different to mine. I'm allowing someone to jump into my world for 10 minutes or 15 minutes without having to load up something separately. The dynamic nature of it means that you can show off, and means that you can adventure or quest or run house.
Sounds good, right? Well, Peter is also famous for making statements about features in his games whilst they're in development that never eventuate into the final product.
There were a lot of promises made in Fable 1, some of which were delivered and some of which weren't. And really the opportunity here was to have Fable 2 was going to stand for something. And what I want it to stand for is a different experience for people. And I really love the idea that, and this is the vision, sitting on the couch with my wife playing Fable. She hates my games because it makes them feel stupid, but to have that dream as a reality would be brilliant.
Peter Molyneux is seen as a visionary in the gaming industry, so we finished up by asking him how he sees the next 5 years in gaming panning out.
I think we're just about ready for some sort of a revolution, and that revolution is going to be a different way of experiencing a computer game. And the reason I say that is that there's two big things that are coming together. One is the amazing production quality of the games that we get, games like Halo and Call of Duty and all of those games, how incredible they are. And then on the other side, you've got the internet and social networking and the ability for people to make things and show off. And imagine if you went just like that and combined those two together. What would you end up with?
Good game.
So, did you guess the game for this week? Of course you did. It was Night Trap, released in 1992 for the Sega Mega CD console. It was an interactive movie which was heavy on the movie and light on the interaction.
Night Trap saw you spying on a group of teenage schoolgirls with the use of security cameras. They were led by troubled actress Dana Plato.
Spying, John? Weren't you meant to be saving them from vampires?
Yeah. Well, anyway, it caused quite a stir when it first came out, with parent groups lobbying to have it banned in the USA. Apart from a few PG-rated nightgown scenes, though, it was mostly harmless fun.
Junglist, are you aware that we're almost out of time once again?
I am. Next week, it's all the bananas, red shells, rainbow roads, flower cups, and lightning bolts you can handle as we get our hands on the latest Mario Kart.
And we'll be meeting some younger gamers. Studies show that kids as young as 4 are playing games nowadays, but is that too young to pick up a controller?
You got him.
Till next week, gamers. Same time, same place. Junglist out.
Bajo out.